We tend to think of technology as being totally impartial, right? But what happens when the very code that's starting to run our lives begins to pick up on our worst habits? Well, today we're going to unpack one of the biggest, most critical challenges in tech right now: bias in artificial intelligence.
I mean, it sounds like a weird question, doesn't it? Could a computer really be biased? We're taught to think of them as these cold, logical machines. They just crunch numbers. So how in the world could one of them be biased?
Well, the answer is a big, resounding yes. AI systems absolutely can be biased, and honestly, they often are. And look, this isn't some kind of futuristic sci-fi problem we're talking about. This is happening today, right now. It's already shaping huge decisions in everything from who gets a job to the kind of healthcare you might receive.
So let's dive into our first section. And to really see just how real this problem is, we're going to look at a powerful example that honestly sent some major shockwaves through the entire tech community.
Okay, so what you're looking at here are the pretty dramatic findings from a landmark MIT study. Researchers took some major, off-the-shelf AI facial recognition systems and put them to the test. And what they found was, wow. For white men, the systems were nearly perfect. I mean, an error rate of less than 1%. But then, look at this. For women with darker skin, the error rate just skyrockets to as high as 34%. Think about that. The AI failed more than a third of the time. This is not just some random glitch, folks. This is a deep, systemic failure.
So it's really important to get this. We're not talking about random, one-off mistakes here. This is what's known as algorithmic bias. And that just means these are errors that are systematic and repeatable. It's like a flaw that's been baked right into the system's DNA. And it creates these unfair outcomes that consistently and predictably privilege one group over others.
All right, so we've seen what the problem is, but the big question is, how does this even happen? Where does a flaw like this actually come from? Let's jump into our next section and explore the roots of this bias. Bias doesn't just show up at one single point. It can creep in at pretty much any stage of the AI lifecycle. It all starts with data bias. That's when the information we feed the AI is flawed from the get-go. Then you have algorithmic bias, which is about the actual design, the choices made when building the model that can lead to unfairness. And of course, there's human bias, the conscious or more often unconscious prejudices of the very people who are building these systems.
Now, the biggest source of bias by far is the data, the stuff the AI learns from. I love this analogy. Think of it like this. If you give a student a textbook that's just full of mistakes and prejudices, you can't really be shocked when their homework is also full of mistakes and prejudices, right? Well, AI is exactly the same. It learns what we teach it. Garbage in, garbage out.
But data bias isn't just one single thing. To really get our heads around it, we've got to break it down into three key types.
Okay, first up is historical bias. This is exactly what it sounds like. The AI learns from our own biased history. There was this famous, or maybe infamous, example of an AI recruiting tool. It was trained on 10 years of hiring data from a big tech company. And because that company had historically hired way more men, the AI literally taught itself that men were better candidates. It even learned to penalize resumes that had the word women's on them, like women's chess club captain. Just incredible. Next is sampling bias. And this one brings us right back to that facial recognition problem we talked about at the very beginning. This happens when the training data just isn't diverse enough. It doesn't reflect the real world. So, with those facial recognition systems, it turned out many of the big datasets used to train them were something like 80% white and mostly male. The AI just never got enough practice, enough data to learn how to accurately see anyone else. Okay, this next one is super important and a little bit sneaky. It's called proxy bias. So a lot of times, developers will try to do the right thing. They'll say, okay, let's remove sensitive stuff like race from the data to make it fair. But here's the thing. The AI is often smarter than that. It finds other clues or proxies, things like your zip code or maybe your healthcare spending habits that are really closely linked to race. And it just uses those instead, continuing the exact same discrimination, just in a less obvious way. So now we have a much better handle on where this bias comes from. But so what? Why does this matter so much? Let's move on and talk about the high-stakes consequences. What are the real-world impacts when these systems get it wrong?
Yeah, this is absolutely not some niche tech problem for engineers to worry about. Biased AI is creating real discrimination in the most important parts of our lives.
We're talking about systems that help decide who gets a job, who gets approved for a loan, the quality of medical care you get, and even who the police are watching.
And these consequences can be incredibly severe. I mean, think about it. In healthcare, if a diagnostic tool is less accurate for you because you're in an underrepresented group, that could lead to a life-threatening misdiagnosis. Or in criminal justice, you have these predictive policing systems. If they're trained on biased arrest data, they create this dangerous feedback loop. The AI tells police to go to certain neighborhoods, which leads to more arrests there, which then proves to the AI that it was right all along. It's a vicious cycle.
There's this quote from a report by EY that just nails it. It says, "The real risk here isn't just that the AI makes a few mistakes. The true danger is that it takes all of the existing inequalities in our society, digitizes them, and then puts them on steroids, scaling them up. It makes old prejudices look like new, objective facts, which makes them even harder to challenge."
Okay, so the problem is obviously huge and pretty scary, but it is not hopeless. So what can we actually do about it? Let's get into the solutions and look at some strategies for building fairer AI.
The first thing to know is that there's no single silver bullet here. Fixing AI bias demands a multi-layered approach. You have to attack it from all sides. As this table shows, for things like historical bias, you need to diversify your data with audits. For those sneaky proxy biases, you've got to actively hunt down and remove those correlated variables. For algorithms that are a black box, you need to develop things like bias impact statements. And to fight human bias, well, you need to build teams with different backgrounds and viewpoints who can check each other's blind spots.
But really, any true solution has to start at the foundation, and that's the data. It all comes back to the data. That means actively collecting data that actually looks like the real world, using things like synthetic data to fill in the gaps, and being super rigorous about how it's all labeled. And it means documenting everything, using tools like data sheets to spell out the data's limitations so developers know exactly what they are and are not working with. But it's not just about technical fixes. We also need better procedures. One really interesting idea is something called a bias impact statement. Think of it as a mandatory pause button. It's a process that forces developers to stop and really think about the potential for harm and discrimination before a single line of code is written. And crucially, it involves bringing in people from different backgrounds, not just engineers, to assess the risks. All right, for our final section, let's zoom out. What's the bigger picture here? What does all this mean for our future, a future that is clearly going to be filled with AI? I think the most important thing to take away from all this is that fixing AI bias isn't a one-and-done kind of deal. You can't just fix it and move on. It's a continuous process. It's going to require constant effort, real human oversight, and a genuine commitment to fairness, not just from the tech companies, but from policymakers and, frankly, from all of us.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the most challenging idea of all. At the end of the day, AI is really just a mirror that we're holding up to our own society. It reflects the biases that are already there. So the question isn't just about how to fix some biased code. The real question is this: how do we build a fairer world for AI to learn from in the first place? That is the challenge that lies ahead.